You're listening to the Place We Find Ourselves podcast. I'm Adam Young, and this is part 2 of a series in which I am joined by Enneagram expert Beth McCord as we explore the question of how your Enneagram type may influence the way you respond to harmful experiences in life. We ended part 1 by looking at types 8, 9, and 1, and today we conclude by looking at types 2 through 7. Let's dive right in by beginning with 2s. Take us inside the world of a 2, Beth.
Yeah, so 2s are the supportive advisors. They fear being worthless, dispensable, disposable, not wanted or needed. They fear that they're going to be rejected, that there's nothing in them that's lovable, that they have to do something in order to prove that they are worthy of some kind of love. And so what you'll see is that they're constantly looking around and feeling other people's feelings, and they just naturally know intuitively what others' needs are. And they feel that they must move into that person's life to insert themselves and to give of themselves so that they can get some kind of love, appreciation, and gratitude back to show, okay, I'm not dispensable. I'm not rejected. The problem is that's just never ending. And people cannot give that to the degree that they long for. And so what they long for is that they are wanted and loved for just being you. And that just feels like it's so far from what they think is true. So no, I have to help, I have to serve, and this person has a need. And if they stop or they don't do it, what internally is being said is, you're selfish. You're not being a good Christian. You're not loving people well. And they'll burn themselves out by trying to get their inner critic to calm down so that they can actually feel loved. And so they're longing to be loved for just being them, but they just can't see it happening.
Yeah. And so a 2 is going to interpret mom's lack of attunement, mom's lack of responsiveness and emotional engagement. A 2 is going to interpret that as, I'm just not inherently lovable. And I try so hard to help mom with whatever she needs. I'm attuned to her. I know what she needs, and I try to help her in the ways that she needs to be helped, but it's never enough to earn her love. And the conclusion is, the reason that I couldn't get mom to be attuned to me, the reason I couldn't get her care, is because I wasn't sufficiently helpful, and ultimately because I'm not really lovable. So you can see the setup for trauma in that. It was the lack of being wanted and loved from mom and dad that sets up a 2 for abuse, because an abuser is going to give you a sense of you are loved. And that is going to make a 2 come alive. I mean, we have to remember, abuse when you're 7, 10, 13, it's not like when you're an adult, right? A 12-year-old is longing to know that they are loved. And an abuser is going to make a 2 feel loved, and then they are going to violate them. And so a 2 is going to process sexual abuse as the person who appeared to truly want me, in ways that mom and dad obviously didn't. The person who presented themselves as someone who wanted and loved me just for me being me, which just makes a 2 absolutely come alive. And here's the key word. It makes a 2 experience some measure of rest. And then comes the violation. And that unleashes an absolute torrent of war inside the heart of a 2. Thoughts on that, Beth? Anything you'd revise or tweak?
No, I think that's so wise and so good to say that, and to lift the burdens from the 2, thinking that they had done something wrong to warrant being abused, to being literally disposed of, right? And that only reiterates their core fear. And so what we want the 2s to know is that their core longing is, yes, you want to be loved for just being you. You don't have to serve and give advice and do all these things. And that's exactly why Christ came. He knew that you couldn't earn it, but he loves you because you're his and only his. And he just pours onto you unconditional love and brings you close like a shepherd does.
And you don't have to help him.
Think about I mean, there's so many verses about it, but just even the Last Supper, when he is sitting at the feet of Peter, washing Peter's feet, and Peter's like, no, no, no. And he is like, I must do this. And we have to learn how to let Christ take care of them. When Christ takes care of them and fills their heart with the love he already has for them, the twos will still be helpers, but it will be out of an overflow versus a desperation to get love. And that's what we really want them to experience.
Yes. Okay, threes, moving on. Take us inside the world of a three. How is a three going to experience life?
Yeah. So what they're fearing is to be unsuccessful, unaccomplished, worthless. What they really are desiring is to have success, and especially in their own community. And that could be a variety of communities that they shapeshift. So they want a successful image, to be admired, believing that their worth is about measuring up. I always tell people, my husband was a place kicker in college, and there's a saying, you're as good as your last kick. Well, in the threes, you're as good as your last success, and or defeat, whatever it is. And so they're constantly moving forward into what is the next thing I can do. And they have a hard time even enjoying the success they had because, oh, nope, got to move to the next one. And so these achievements are the basis of who they think they are. I am what I do. And so what they really long for is to be loved and valued for simply being themselves. So it sounds a lot like two, but this is different. They feel like they have to achieve to be loved. And that's different than having to serve and give as a two. So they're all about goals and accomplishments and tasks. If I do all these things, I will be seen and loved and admired. And that's kind of where they go.
Yeah. And so for a three growing up, they're 8 years old. There's a 10-year-old boy who's a type three. They are going to interpret a lack of attunement from dad, a lack of responsiveness from mom. They're going to be more apt to interpret that as, this is because I'm not achieving enough. This is because I'm not getting good enough grades. This is because I'm not making enough extra points. This is because I'm not achieving enough socially. The heartache for a three with developmental trauma, this doesn't apply to threes that don't have developmental trauma, but the heartache of a three with developmental trauma is that they did need to earn their parents' love. And they earned it through achieving things. And so for a three, that's just going to create an absolute explosion of drive to achieve. But it's also their trap, because if they don't, the core fear is going to absolutely light up, electric. If I don't keep achieving, the world's going to end. So how might a three process sexual abuse? You presented a successful and admirable image to another person, and they noticed you in ways that your mother and father did not. And they responded positively to all of your achievements and all of your goodness. And then that person who noticed you violated you. And so for a three, again, we see this pattern emerging with abuse. The thing that you thought made sense of your life all of a sudden becomes the context for profound violation. And that just begins to screw with your head, and fragmentation results.
I think what I would also add is they'll feel like their success was the demise of their failure, right? Like it was the reason for this quote unquote failure of the abuse. Like they did something wrong.
Yes.
By being admirable, and so there would be this war inside of the type saying you have to be successful and admirable, but then the fear of being successful and admirable.
Oh, that's so well said, Beth. So I want to reflect on it because light bulbs are going off for me. So for a three, the horror of abuse is everything in my being says that if I am successful, if I project a good image, if I achieve things, then it's going to go well and I will experience rest.
Mm-hmm.
And the war for a three is I was doing all those things and it got me abused.
Right.
My abuser noticed me. My abuser smiled at my achievements. My abuser was impressed with all that I was able to do as a 9-year-old, as a 13-year-old, and then all those things that I thought would bring me rest brings me the opposite. And it unleashes a war.
Yeah. And yet they kind of can't stop doing it, right? Because that's the wiring that we have of our personality. And so there's this war inside of shame and self-condemnation of, I need to stop doing this, and yet I can't. And that's where the core longing that you will be loved for simply being you, and you're valued, you're seen, you're recognized. Now, here's the coolest thing for the 3. You think that you have to have all of these accomplishments. Well, the only accomplishment we really need has been completed by Christ. And he did everything that's needed and gave it to us. So all of the accomplishments he's had was put on us. So you can literally rest in the fact that you have done all of these accomplishments because Christ has put it in you. And so no longer do you have to strive to become something. You already are something. You're his beloved child.
The irony, of course, is that a 3 is going to have the hardest time of all the types believing what you just said.
Yeah.
And so in many ways, our journey on this earth is within the framework, the lens of our type. Like for me as an 8, coming to rest in the fact all things will work together for my good. That includes the ways I've been betrayed. And so in that sense, rest for me is, can I believe that Jesus will actually use the betrayals to work things together for my good? And an 8 is going to have an absolute war with believing that. So for each of the 9 types, redemption gets personal in a different way. Right. The work of Christ, what Jesus offers to you, gets deeply personal in a different way. So Beth is going to appreciate, her love for Jesus is going to come out of a different place than my love for Jesus.
Yeah.
Because Jesus is giving you something that touches you so deeply.
Exactly. And we get to share that with one another, right? And that's the beauty. It's not that one's better than the other or one should be less than the other. It's we all collectively reflect God and glorify him when we come together versus being opposing forces. And that's where it's really beautiful.
Let's talk about the uniqueness of these Enneagram 4s. Now, if you're a 4 out there, you're probably resisting this entire pod, if you've even made it through to this far, because 4s are you can't reduce me to a type, right? So tell us about 4s and their specialness.
4s, the romantic individualists, they really run away from the fear of being inadequate, emotionally cut off, plain, mundane, defective, flawed, and without having a unique significance. So they're trying to find out more and more their authentic self, their unique self. And kind of the reason why that happens is they feel that there's something fundamentally defective and flawed in them, but others possess qualities that they lack. And so they feel like I can't be fully loved and seen and known unless I present this authentic, unique, special self. And so you'll see them striving to get to know that authentic self. On one side, they know themselves well. On the other side, they're striving to know them even more. And so they feel they must present this unique, special self to others because that's where they think they're going to get loved. Now, they feel misunderstood most of the time, which then hinders them from feeling loved. What they long to know is you are seen and loved for exactly who you are, special and unique.
And so for a 4, growing up in a home with developmental trauma, you are going to conclude that the reason mom isn't attuned and responsive to me, the reason she's not engaged with me is because I'm not special enough or I'm not unique enough to be significant in her eyes. That's how. So for a 3, you're going to conclude, I haven't achieved enough. Not so for a 4. A 4 is going to process developmental trauma as this is happening because I'm not special enough. This is happening because I'm not unique enough, not enough to be significant in her eyes, not enough to hold my father's gaze. And so I'm going to conclude and I'm going to resolve to be more special, more unique, to somehow get the gaze, which is to say the love, the acceptance of other people in my world. And you can see the writing on the wall for abuse here. I mean, your abuser thought you were more special than your mother, thought you were more special than your father. It is the heartache of all abuse. Your abuser may have seen your specialness more than anyone else in your life, and that touched something so deep in you, and it opened you in trust. It opened you to a place of rest. And then when you are at that place of rest, violation occurs and wars erupt inside your heart. Anything you'd add, Beth?
You know, my heart breaks for the fours because they feel so misunderstood, especially from their parents. They feel like they're somehow this outsider. They're different, which can make them want to withdraw even more, especially if abuse has happened.
All right, we're on our last three. So what's it like to be a 5? Tell us about 5s moving about in this world.
Yes, so 5s are the investigative thinkers, and they really are wanting to be capable and competent. They fear not having enough knowledge and information, and that the world will overtake them if they're not ready with this knowledge. They fear being annihilated, ignorant, invaded, and basically having obligations placed on them. And so they feel like I have to research and know a little bit of everything, and definitely maybe specialize in one area that I'm really passionate about in order to not be harmed, in order to not feel incapable. That to them, that would just be, to be ignorant would be the worst thing. So they're striving for knowledge. Knowledge is power to them. And so what you're going to find is that they're going to look for every detail possible. But not only that, one thing that's really important to know about 5s is their core weakness is avarice. And this is not a greediness for money. It is a way that they feel that they have their inner resources are lacking. Like they only have 20% of battery life all day versus maybe you have 150 as an 8. And so they feel like they only have so much interaction with people that they can do. So they have to ration this energy out. And so they need some private time to think through their feelings and thoughts alone, but that can look like to people that they're not personable, that they're withdrawn, they're aloof, but it's just that they need more time to recharge. And it's not just all introverts are this. This is a little bit further than just introversion. Everyone can be introverts, all types, and all types can be extroverts. This has to do with this internal feeling that they will be depleted. So what they do is they minimize their needs and hoard their stuff and their own resources so they don't have to depend on others. They will have autonomy and take care of themselves.
Yeah, and so it's this underlying fear of being helpless because I am catastrophically depleted.
Yes. Yeah.
So for a 5 with developmental trauma, I mean, the core of the helplessness that a 5 is going to feel as a 10-year-old girl it is just immense because I can't get mom to be attuned to me. I can't get her to respond to me. I can't get her to be emotionally engaged with me. I try, and yet at the end of the day, I am alone on my bed at night and I am feeling this catastrophic depletion, this helplessness. And my experience with my mom, with my dad, proves that this is what's true about the world. I am helpless and I have 20% battery life. And by the time I'm on my bed at night, I have negative 5% battery life. Does that sound like how a 5 might experience a traumatic home?
Yeah. And the core longing is your needs are not a problem. So they feel that if they have a need and they tell someone, it's actually this huge burden. Like it's like a boulder that they're giving someone else. And so they keep it to themselves and they minimize their needs. And that's why they withdraw a lot. And they're like, okay, I'll just take care of it myself. And yet their parents, they may have been saying, and whether verbally or through action, yes, your needs are a problem. But they long to know it wasn't a problem. And so because they're literally experiencing this, they want to withdraw even further within themselves, which then sets them up for abuse, which I'm sure you can kind of attest to with what that might look like.
Yeah, but I just want to go back to what you said, the core longing.
Yes, the core longing is that your needs are not a problem.
Right. And so for a 5, an 8-year-old girl, she's going to take a risk because she hasn't learned yet about the world. She's going to take a risk and express one of her needs. I mean, we all do this as children. We take the risk and we express one of our needs. And if a 5 is met with some measure of either being dismissed when she takes that risk or even shamed, which is the nature of developmental trauma, then they are going to know, like in the core of their being, in their implicit memory, they're going to know what I fear is just the case. My needs are a problem and they're not going to be met. And they're just going to create more relational disconnection in my world.
Absolutely. And that really sets up for abuse in the sense of an abuser who can see that they have needs can come in and know how to deliver that in a way that makes them feel safe for the moment.
Yes.
But then comes in and abuses them with that.
Yes, absolutely. Really well said. So let's move on to the 6s. What's it like to be a 6?
Yeah, so the 6 is the loyal guardians. Now, they have quite a few fears. They fear itself, being without support and guidance. They are constantly having this fear that they are not capable to survive in this world on their own, and they must seek outside support in getting direction and guidance from others or belief systems, institutions, you name it. And so they're constantly looking for, how can I navigate this world, because I can't trust myself. That's the wounding message of the 6. You can't trust yourself. So yours as an 8's the opposite, right? You can't trust others. Theirs is, I can't trust myself. And the reason is they have this inner committee. Remember, the 1s have a one loud inner critic. The 6s have an inner committee that's chiming in from all different directions. Well, what about this? Well, what about that? But it could be this, but don't forget about that. And it causes a lot of confusion and self-doubt, because which one do they pick? Whereas for the 1 and the 8, you guys have a very clear internal gut sense of the direction you must take. So the 6s struggle with this self-doubt and scanning the horizon for worst case scenarios. What they long to hear is you are safe, which totally can set them up for abuse.
So for a 12-year-old girl who's a 6, when she is sexually abused, her conclusion is going to be, I knew it. My gut sense, what I trusted is not, it is not a reliable guide. And so there's just this profound sense of, I can't trust my gut. I can't trust my gut. I can't trust myself, because what I thought was safe and secure, namely this person, turned around and it became my least safe place on the planet in a fraction of a second. And so it's just this solidifying of what they already feared, which is, I can't trust myself. And the world is not safe. And so that inner committee becomes, full bore. Say a bit more about that, what that inner committee is going to do.
Man, the inner committee is going to chime in. I know, like, my husband is a 6, and he will say, see, I knew I shouldn't have done that, or I should have been prepared. I'm responsible for this, because if I would have thought through, and my husband, he'll talk about an incident that happened for him when he was, I think, 7. And I'm looking at him like, you were 7. You don't know this. You were put in harm's way. You did not know that was going to happen. You shouldn't put that responsibility on you, but that's what the 6 does. They feel responsible, that it's their fault. And that's really sad, because then they're constantly going to be living with this. I must scan the horizon for worst case scenarios because it's up to me. And yet at the same time, their wounding message is, don't trust yourself. So then what do?
I mean, you can just see, the catastrophic intensity of this, because the nature of trauma is hypervigilance. It's a scanning of the horizon. But for a 6, that hypervigilance is on absolute steroids. Like, nobody knows hypervigilance like a traumatized 6.
What makes me really sad for 6s is, like you said, they are already naturally going to be in this worried, anxious state. That's who they are. And so to compound it with real trauma, what happens is most of the type 6s that come to me, they'll say, Beth, I think I'm a 6, and I just got to let you know, I think I'm crazy. And my heart just leaps out at them because so many of the people in my life are sixes, my husband, my son, my mom. And I'm like, you're not crazy. You have an inner committee that is telling you that. And it's chiming in from so many different directions. It feels like you're crazy, but you're not. Let's work on this inner committee together.
Right. And the nature of trauma is that it calls into question your gut.
Yes.
And so for a 6, when that inner committee goes, on just through the roof with different voices and chiming in about different things, the cacophony of voices inside, the conclusion of all of it for a 6 is, I don't know what's true. I don't know what I can trust.
Exactly. And they looked outside themselves, which is what the personality is telling them to do, to look outside themselves, to trust someone. And they did. And then look what happened. It's devastating.
It's devastating. All right, last type. Let's bring it home with 7s. Tell us about what's a 7 going to be like?
Yeah, so the entertaining optimist. So we're ending with the type that has lots of energy and positivity. Now, they fear being trapped in emotional pain, sadness, deprived, restricted, bored, and definitely missing out on something. They want to achieve their wildest dreams and imaginations. They perceive that life, they can never get it, right? That it's almost like a kid that's starving, okay? And it's like the world and our parents are giving us cotton candy. And it looks so great, like, oh, yeah, this is going to help my deep hunger pains. And then they eat it, and it's like, oh, that tasted really good, but that did not satisfy. So they're constantly looking for stimulation and excitement to fill this inner void that's inside. Now, the problem is what they're longing for is that you will be taken care of. And yet the world and their parents, it doesn't feel like they are giving them what they really need. And so they don't feel this satiated desire that they're so longing for.
Right. So you could just, I'm queasy right now thinking about, a 12-year-old, a 10-year-old 7 who is about to be abused, because you see the setup. It really comes back to this issue of grooming, which all abuse comes back to. Abusers almost always provide some measure of care and kindness before the abuse proper begins. And for a 7, this care and kindness is going to come as a huge relief. It's this sense of perhaps my needs and desires will be met by someone else after all. Perhaps this hunger inside is going to be satiated. And indeed, they get a taste of it, especially when they've got developmental trauma at home. Now they're getting a taste of it from the cousin. They're getting a taste of it from their band director. They're getting a taste of it. And that just, it gives them a sense of rest, a sense of I'm home. Yeah. And then comes the violation.
Yep. Absolutely. And what's kind of also makes me scared about this situation is what a 7 usually does in the midst of pain and suffering is they flee out into more stimulation and excitement. What can help them to avoid dealing with what happened? And it can become so pervasive, it's destructive to them. And it's really hard for 7s to enter into counseling or care because you have to deal with it. And so to find the right counselor that understands this absolute need to avoid this pain is so important, to have someone compassionate, understanding, to walk with you little step by little step.
Well, Beth, this has been an interesting conversation, I think, for both of us as we have tried to think about what does it look like for each of the types when they experience trauma to move about in this world? And how are they, frankly, how are they going to get bound by lies that they know in the deepest part of their being are simply true?
Yeah.
So thank you for your taking a risk and reflecting on these things with me. Again, it's not the definitive word, but hopefully it gives a start to thinking through, if you have a history of trauma and you know your Enneagram type, to thinking through, my hope is that light bulbs would go off about, this is why my world feels the way it does.
Exactly.
Because when a 3 is traumatized, this is what they're going to be inclined to war with. And
Right.
when an 8 and when a 4 are experience developmental trauma, this is what their life is going to look like, the tension, the wars inside, because they're different for each type.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me. I feel so passionate about this work because, like I said, the Enneagram is illuminating the path that we're already on so that we can see the gospel so much more clearly as we journey in our relationship with Christ. The Enneagram is not the transformation. The gospel is the transformation. And so I want to allow people to see what path they need to really dig into and the messages they need to pour into their heart.
Before we end, just remind people, if they want more on the Enneagram, where can they go, Beth?
Absolutely. So we also have a really great following on our Instagram account, Your Enneagram Coach. So that's a lot of fun. It's a great community that is chiming in. We have every 2 weeks, we do a series. And then I highlight on that series one type every day during the work week. And so it just is a really great way to not only learn about yourself in that regard. So like this week, we're talking about what causes conflict in that person's type or makes us upset. And it's like, oh, that's why for you, like, that's why my wife gets upset when I do this, you know? So we highlight every type. And then we just have a really great community that chimes in. So that's a really good free resource on my website, yourenneagramcoach.com. You can take a free assessment up in the upper right-hand corner. And I have 3 steps for it. And the main reason is an assessment can only take you so far. It's only about all assessments with the Enneagram are about 70 to 85% accurate. And a lot of it has to do with, do you really know yourself? And people can attend they do, but as you've known, like once you dig into the Enneagram, like, I really didn't know myself. And so the test is going to only get you so far. Step 2 is an overview, a PDF overview. It's free, and it shows you the core motivations of every type. So that's going to help you to solidify and verify your main type. And then the third is the Discovering You course that we talked about, the 2-hour Cliff Notes overview of the Enneagram that will take you through all of it. And it has a workbook that's great. Then once you find your type, I highly recommend my Exploring You course. I have taken the time for all 9 types to have 5 sessions that I video recorded, take you through a guide sheet that breaks down your personality so that you can understand why these things are happening and how to grow in the gospel. So that's my biggest thing that I would, and then for those that are wanting to use the Enneagram in their practices or like counseling practices or pastors or ministry leaders, we do have a Becoming an Enneagram Coach certification program that you can be a part of.
Well, Beth, thank you so much. Thank you for the past 15 years of your life that you've invested in helping people understand the core motivations of their hearts. And thanks for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Adam.
Thanks, everyone, for listening. Music for this podcast was composed by Rick Wilson and Rob Mathis. By the way, if you want a beautiful Christmas album, Rob Mathis has an amazing CD and DVD called Christmas is Coming. And it is dawning on me now that I should have mentioned this a month ago, but you can buy it for next year. The album's got Vanessa Williams, Michael McDonald from the Doobie Brothers on it, David Sanborn on sax. It's the best Christmas album I've heard. Highly recommend it. In 2019, I am likely going to be releasing episodes every 2 weeks instead of every week. It's just a little bit more than I can handle right now to release good content every week. So I'm going to shoot for every 2 weeks. Thank you again for listening.